Heal Me by Embracing Cedric on AO3.
Chapter 6. Hitoshi walked into the infirmary, creating his wrist, and Chapter 6. Hitoshi walked into the infirmary, cradling his wrist covered in sweat and dirt. He was still in his hero costume, the black padded prototype with purple striped accents that Hitsumi had designed for him. The extra layer of protection were built in to give him an edge against combat-oriented quirks. The body armor held out fairly well against the wall he slammed into during training, but could only do so much. Hitoshi Shinso! Hitoshi was pulled from his thoughts by a bright, happy voice calling for his attention. How can I help you? It was Recovery Girl's green-haired intern, sitting in the swivelly chair at the desk in the mirror. A quick glance around showed an absence of the older heroine, which Hitoshi figured was for the best. It felt like every other training session he found himself being sent to the infirmary. He had been starting to wonder when Recovery Girl would get sick of him. You know my name? Hitoshi questioned. Class 2A had been introduced as a whole, not name by name, so he wondered where this boy had learned his. Well, I saw you at the sports festival, Midoriya explained, gesturing over his shoulder at the computer behind him. The screen only showed the desk, but he'd likely mimicked whatever he'd been reading when Hitoshi walked in. I'm also reading every student file, and I already went through yours. You're reading every student file, Hitoshi repeated, skepticism clear in his voice as he considered the amount of effort and mental space such a task would require. Every single one, Midoriya confirmed with a nod. His eyes narrowed, a challenging spark in his gaze that made it seem like he was ready for a fight. Don't question me. Hitoshi held up an uninjured hand to mock Cinder as he chuckled. Despite the healer's impossibly joyful attitude, it became clear in certain moments that he had a much more assertive side to him. It made sense considering Midoriya apparently grew up with someone like Bakugou in his life, and the two seemed very close. To be honest, Hitoshi would have guessed that they were more than just close after witnessing their reunion a couple weeks back. Wait, Hitoshi said, his muddled brain finally processing what he heard. You know about my quirk, then? Of course I do, Midoriya confirmed as he held out a hand and began listing things off with his finger. I know your birthday, your allergies, and you knew about my quirk and you still responded to me, Hitoshi clarified. Midoriya paused and dropped his hands, leveling an ineligible gaze at Hitoshi as he stood from his desk. His grin had fallen, replaced with a neutral expression that gave away nothing yet at the same time made Hitoshi feel distinctly unease. Should I be worried about you trying to brainwash me? He asked, voice resembled and measured. No, I would never. Great, then sit down, Midoriya ordered, gesturing towards one of the empty beds. His smile had returned in a flash, as if the cold response from moments ago had never happened. You come here to get healed, right? Hitoshi stood for a moment before moving to sit on the bed. He decided it would be better to do as the healer said than to question anything. To be fair, he was the one who brought up using his quirk in a manipulative way first. He was just so used to other people assuming that from the start when they spoke to him. Mr. Aizawa is worried I may have a concussion, Hitoshi told him. Also, my arm got tangled in my binding cloth and my wrist was twisted. Why does he think you have a concussion? Midoriya asked as he pulled a pen light from his pocket and began to shine it in Hitoshi's eyes. I slammed into a wall, Hitoshi murmured quietly. You slammed into, Midoriya prompted, starting to pick up Hitoshi's soft voice. A wall? He repeated, louder than before. I was swinging around with the blinding cloth and slammed into a wall. He braced for a laugh, but only heard Midoriya give an understanding hum. So you watched the sports festival? You were taken out super easily without any combat training under your belt, Midoriya replied, pocketing the pen light. Sure, the first tournament match worked out, but with so much attention on you, by the time the second match rolled around, people were starting to figure out how your quirk worked. Todoroki just needed to freeze you before you had the chance to even speak. He shrugged, and carefully picked up Hitoshi's injured wrist, pressing gently at his fingers. Your only real advantage was people not knowing about your quirk. Your bedside manner is terrible, Hitoshi grippled. Unprepared for an essay analysis, Midoriya had responded with him. He drew in a sharp breath and Midoriya turned his wrist in a particular way and heard the healer murmur a soft apology under his breath. I came in here to be healed and you just tearing apart my abilities. Lack of abilities, Midoriya corrected, as he gently released the wrist and flicked at Hitoshi's forehead with his finger. And you didn't let me finish. Hitoshi opened his mouth to complain about Midoriya's flicking him, only close to it when he realized his mind felt slightly clearer. His nausea faded and the extra bit of drowsiness had been clinging to him slipped away. He realized in small moments of contact Midoriya had already partially healed his brain injury. Oh, good, more insults, Hitoshi said indignantly, kicking back on his instincts to reply back with something sardonic. Keep them coming. I could tell you were clever. You wouldn't have made it so far if you did with your quirk if you weren't, Midoriya continued, placing his hands more securely on Hitoshi's head. You managed to get through the obstacle race and the Kaguya battle, all while keeping the mechanics of it mostly hidden. It's not a flashy combat quirk, but in my opinion, there can be much greater benefits in simply knowing more than your opponent does. Doesn't matter much when it comes to an entrance exam, Hitoshi told him, silently amazed by how much his head felt after Midoriya let go. He'd been skeptical that he actually had a head injury, but the difference was like night and day. Can't really outsmart a giant robot. I always thought the entrance exam was well balanced, Midoriya started, as he picked up Hitoshi's wrist again. I thought you had a lot of potential when I first saw you in the sports festival. It's good to see that it was recognized and you were transferred into the hero course. You even kicked someone out of their spot. I didn't kick them out. Hitoshi let out a small sigh of relief, as the pain quickly left his wrist. They were fed up with the targeted villain attacks and transferred to Tsuyu. Still, you worked hard to get where you were, Midoriya acknowledged, finally taking a step back. The healer began twirling his own wrist, as if trying to work out the sudden stiffness. It's people like you who truly deserve to be heroes. Hitoshi watched his own critical glaze as Midoriya wandered back over the desk to receive a bag of chips from one of the drawers. He hesitated for a moment before the door reached through to flick the lights off, killing the harsh, fluorescent glow in the room, which left behind only sunlight that filled through the windows. Are you sure you're friends with Bakugou? Hitoshi questioned. Everything about you is nicer, even down to your quirk. Are you implying Kachan's quirk is bad? Midoriya challenged, as he made his way back over to Hitoshi. His feet dragged a bit more as he walked now, and his eyes held the same expressionless fogginess that Hitoshi saw every day when he looked in the mirror. It's destructive. Let me rephrase. He had never used his quirk for bad reasons, Midoriya pressed, plopping down on the other unoccupied bed. He began to snack on the chip as he started up at the ceiling. Quirks don't define people. People define themselves through their actions and intentions. Putting a label on inherently non-objectifying aspect of a life is only to divide. Hitoshi nearly winced, reported dry in his throat as he processed Midoriya's words. The hero had temperatures to ramble. That was clear. However, not a single word that came from his mouth so far had been insignificant. It seemed almost impossible, and yet every word, every phrase held a powerful weight to it. It was clear that Midoriya considered each thought in his head and meant every sound that came from his mouth. That's why Hitoshi was so caught off guard to hear Midoriya didn't believe quirks defined the users. Hitoshi had always been surrounded by people fearful of his brainwashing abilities, hesitant to speak in front of him, lest he take control. He heard whispers speculating about when he would finally cave and become the villain he was destined to be. He had made some friends along the way who trusted that he'd never use his quirk with ill intents, but it was so rare to hear someone speak so plainly against labeling of quirks. Quirks aside, Hitoshi continued, wanting to hear Midoriya speak more. His personality doesn't exactly lend to the image of a hero. Midoriya glanced away from the ceiling and towards Hitoshi, his green eyes assertive in the dim lighting of the room. For a moment, Hitoshi wondered if he'd gone too far by picking at Bakugou's characteristics in front of someone who he would consider them close friends, until he saw the corners of Midoriya's mouth twitch in a playful smile. He's prideful, competitive, and blunt with an ego the size of Mount Everest, Midoriya stated. That's what happens when you grow up getting praised for everything you do and immediately being the best at everything you attempt. He held out a bag of chips towards Hitoshi. UA is the best place for him to be because it takes him down a few pegs. He actually loses here. You seem happy about that, Hitoshi noted, reaching over to take a chip from the offered bag. I am happy. It helped him mature, Midoriya told him, his smile growing wilder and fonder. The people he's met here have helped him grow. He's never really had that in middle school, and yes, men who boosted his ego, He glanced back towards the ceiling, expression growing remorseful. It didn't help that I was so far away from him. Hitoshi silently processed the behavior he saw before him, and coupled it with what he'd seen with Midoriya and Bakugou he had first reunited in PE grounds. There had been plenty of speculation from students and faculty alike following Midoriya's arrival at UA's high school. People wondered about his quirk or what his life was growing up on Island must have been like. But within all those rumors, a bit of gossip. Hardly anyone was talking about how uncharacteristically soft Bakugou acted around Midoriya, or how deeply familiar Midoriya seemed with the aspects of Bakugou's character. Hitoshi was beginning to think that people were talking about the wrong things. You seem to care about him a lot, Hitoshi murmured, as he glanced at the unguarded affection that had settled in Midoriya's features while he spoke about Bakugou. Like, a lot. Midoriya seemed to pick up on the implication tone on his voice, as his eyes widened and darted back over to Hitoshi, who simply started back with an annoying smirk. The suggestion was a bit of a shot in the dark, but Hitoshi was right about it then. Oh, look at the time, Midoriya shut up from the bed, flustered and blushing. His voice was a touch louder than it needed to be, and he gestured wildly at the clock in the room as he began to pace. You're missing class. You're been healed. You should be fine now, and I can't let Mr. Aizawa think that I'm letting his students avoid schoolwork or anything. We just have free period for the rest of the day, Hitoshi informed him with a smile, prompting Midoriya to freeze and stare at him with wide and fearful eyes. But I'm sure you're busy, so I'll get out of your hair. Hitoshi stood from the bed and walked towards a still frozen Midoriya, who could barely make eye contact with him, clasping the green-haired boy on the shoulder as he passed. Thanks for the healing, Midoriya. As much as Katsuki hated to admit it, it felt strange to walk around campus alone. Normally he had the group of idiots he reluctantly called friends clinging to his every move, but they had all scattered during free period. Training that day had been rough for everyone, so Mr. Aizawa made the decision to give the class the remainder of the school day to do as they pleased, so long as it was productive. Hiroshima and Sero had wanted to spar, while Ashido and Kaminari had run off to beg Yabumozu for help in studying. Katsuki had used the free period to get ahead of work and upcoming materials, which meant he had stayed in the classroom to ask Mr. Aizawa questions. When the school day finally ended, Katsuki found himself walking back towards the dorms alone. Usually he liked the silence and alone time. It was part of the reason why he liked mountain climbing so much, because it allowed him to be isolated. But recently he had grown used to the constant enduring chatter and social contact that surrounded him no matter how much he protested and pushed people away. He would almost admit that he missed it. At least, he thought he missed it, until it came to a shocking of purple in the corner of his eyes coming straight towards him. What do you want, bag eyes? Katsuki questioned as his classmate grew closer. Shouto had changed out of his hero costume and looked significantly better compared to when he was training earlier to be healed. Katsuki had nothing against the kid, quite opposite, actually. He could admire his determination it must have taken to switch into the hero department from general studies. There was just something about the way he spoke and acted that just made Katsuki's skin crawl. Shouta knew exactly what to say to make Katsuki snap, and could do it with fewer words than anyone else in his classroom. Katsuki could admit that it was a helpful skill considering his quirk was determined on a result, but that didn't make him any less pissed off about it. Just walking to the dorm, same as you. Shinso answered as he fell into step alongside Katsuki. Your boyfriend is interesting. Katsuki stopped walking. What? Shinso stopped walking a few steps ahead and turned around to look back at Katsuki, one brow raised as confusion painted his features. I said your friend is interesting, Shinso repeated, and Katsuki let out a small breath when he said friend and not boyfriend. You know, your friend Midoriya? We had a lovely discussion about quirks and when he healed me. Katsuki shook his head before he started walking again. Shinso matched his steps. At the end of the day, Katsuki was tired. He must have heard wrong. His hearing wasn't always the most reliable to begin with. I mean, you got him to talk about quirks and he didn't keep you there for 5 hours? Oh, I wish we could have talked for that long, Shinso said, his tone affectionate in a way that made Katsuki's eye twitch. I really enjoy spending time with him. How's your skull? Katsuki murmured, forcing down his feelings of jealousy. It made a pretty nasty sound when you slammed into that wall. I'll live, Shinso replied with a shrug. Too bad. What was that? I said, I'm so glad. Katsuki took another breath, suddenly losing his patience with every word that came out of Shinso's mouth. Did you need something, or did you just want to tell me how much you liked talking to Izuku? I was wondering if you were willing to train with me sometime, Shinso said. I'm a little behind when it comes to combat ability, and you seem like you know a thing or two. You want to train with me? Katsuki questioned, suspicious of the request. There are other people in our classroom with decent combat skills. I'm sure you'll find them much more friendlier. I've realized recently that I don't know much about you. Well, I started that I wasn't here to make friends. It's a bit foolish not to do anything about the people I could be working alongside in the future, so I'd like to if we train together. Shinzo paused and let out a light chuckle. That is, if you consider me worthy enough opponent. Any opponent is worthy, so long as they don't half-ass it, Katsuki stated. I don't have patience for extras who don't work hard or give it their all. Got it. Katsuki glanced over his classmate as they neared the 2A dormitory. He expected an arrogant smile or mocking grin, but Shinso's expression was calm and serious. Katsuki sighed and quickly weighed the pros and cons in his head. Despite the lack of tact, he considered most decisions very carefully before acting. I go running every morning before class, Katsuki finally said, deciding to start with something small to see how serious his classmate was. He paused on the steps of the dormitory and looked back at Shinso, who had the beginning of a smile tugged at his corners and his mouth. I leave at 6 o'clock. Don't be late. Wouldn't dream of it. Shinso just fucking with Bakugou is absolutely hilarious to me. The whole, yeah, your boyfriend? What? I said your friend? Oh, yeah, my friend. Like, boy, I know what you were doing there, and you know what? Kudos. I would do the same thing. I am just as evil like that. I would definitely tease someone, while making sure that they think I'm not teasing them and that they're going insane, because you know what? I'm chaotic like that. My best friend who made my profile picture is doing art commissions for just $10. If you're interested, contact them on Discord, at Roji, that is RROJI. Make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds, and have a wonderful day or night. Join our community server, link in the description, subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.